Here we go with our feature Friday guest. Always, for me, one of the most fun times of the week. He is the voice of the Kansas Jayhawks. Brian Hanni joining us in studio. Brian, good morning.
Pete, great to see you, my friend. How are you?
Let me just twist that mic a little bit for me. There we go. Twist it like that. There we go. There we go. We got them all set up. Hey, man, I got this on the text line before we start talking little shop here. Pete, I don't know if I can handle the gorgeous radio voices of you and Brian Hanni at the same time. Were you born with this voice, Brian Hanni?
Oh, man, that's way too kind. No, that's way too kind. It's great to be in here with you. I've never been to these studios before. What a gorgeous facility.
I know. We've come a long way. We got into these studios 4 years ago, and that's something that, Mark, tell them the truth. Everyone says that when they come into these studios.
It's true. Yeah.
They do. So you and I have known each other actually for 13 years. You first started coming on a show I was doing in Oklahoma when you were doing Rock Chalk Talk in Lawrence.
Yep.
So you finish up at KU, right? And then you start that show. Is that how your career went early on?
Yeah, I was selling radio advertising as a senior at KU. Was lucky enough to get a full-time job heading into graduation and launched Rock Chalk Sports Talk in 2002 with Brett Ballard, who was a walk-on KU men's basketball player. He was graduating at the same time, too. He's now the head coach at Washburn. Has had a great coaching career. But we did that show together for a while and had many hosts over the course of a 10-year run, including Scott Pollard, Bud Stallworth, Todd Reesing, Wayne Simeon. It was kind of the who's who of former KU sports stars by the end of it.
So you were the main host for 10 years,
right,
and then you had rotating co-hosts over those 10 years.
Correct.
Wow.
And we prided ourselves, something that I learned early on that I was blessed to figure out is that at 22, coming out of KU, though I had great journalism school training, I was a 22-year-old kid. There was so much I didn't know about sports that guys like Bud Stallworth, who played in the NBA and played at Kansas in the 1970s, David Lawrence, who was in the trenches in the 1980s for KU football, and all the other names I mentioned as well, these guys had life experience that I could tap into. And so I became kind of the point guard that just set them up, passing the rock and letting them take the shots. Wow. And it turned into kind of I described it as a Baskin-Robbins of sports talk radio. We had so many different flavors, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It was a different show host every week with me. So you got so many different perspectives that way. And, you know, I love doing the games now. I love all the opportunities that being the voice of the Jayhawks affords me philanthropically. But some of my favorite days on a live microphone will always be those 10 years with those particular co-hosts because I learned so much. And in so many ways, it prepared me to be the voice of the Jayhawks all these years later because of the history I was able to tap into on a daily basis.
So you're doing this talk show for 10 years in Lawrence, and then in 2012, you go down to Lubbock. You are the Texas Tech men's basketball. Was it men and women or just men's basketball?
Men's basketball, baseball, and then I did football pregame.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're doing that, and that's when I was doing my show down in Northwest Oklahoma. You would come on to talk KU, and then we'd have you on to talk Texas Tech. Did you want to be, well, obviously you did, but when did you want to move into that play-by-play role and say, I've got to go down to Lubbock and get my chops doing that?
Yeah, that was always the dream, to be a play-by-play voice somewhere. Obviously, as a KU guy, the ultimate dream was to be at Kansas. And I was doing women's basketball with Nate Bukaty at the time at KU. I was doing baseball at KU, and I was doing a ton of high school sports locally in the Sunflower League. Free State, Lawrence High, Olathe, Shawnee Mission Northwest, all that stuff. And I was enjoying that immensely. And I was the understudy at that time for Bob Davis. And over the course of 8 years, I filled in for him 15 times on men's games when he had a conflict.
Okay.
But women's basketball and baseball were my main sports. And I had a KU sport administrator and Jayhawk Radio Network guy come to me at the time, and he said, listen, probably you're in line to be the next voice of the Jayhawks, but in order to get this job in the end, you need to leave in order to come home because we can't just hire the understudy.
Yeah.
As Tom Bowman of Learfield would say, you got to win the press release.
Yeah.
And to say, oh, we hired the backup, you know, it doesn't quite have the same pop to it, right?
Yep.
So he told me, you got to go get your own men's gig somewhere else. And I turned down other jobs in smaller conferences, smaller schools, and Texas Tech ended up being the perfect fit. It allowed me to stay in the Big 12, stay top of mind awareness with KU people. I actually did something for the 4 years I was down there where I was still on air in Kansas with a Big 12 sports update every single day I was away for those 4 years. Kept my pediatric cancer organization going back in Kansas the whole time, which for some reason Tech people didn't like. But ultimately, you know, stayed with one foot in the door a little bit. and was blessed to get to come home in the summer of 2016 as a result. So it all worked out. Super fortunate, super grateful, and now living my dream today as the voice of the Jayhawks.
When you mentioned before we got on air it had been 9 years, I would have ballparked 7. I didn't realize it had been 9 years. So take us back to that 2016 summer. Did you feel like it was a slam dunk, or were you still like, I don't know what they're going to do? I'm not sure if I'm really the guy.
Not at all. I mean, I had no idea it was going to end up like it did. I hoped that it would, and I knew I was one of 4 or 5 legitimate contenders, but it was a strong talent pool, and went up against some dear friends that have gone on to do great things too. It just happened to be the right fit and the right timing for me. And that's the thing I tell students sometimes that want to get into play-by-play, particularly college play-by-play. There's a lot of luck involved. It's a ton of networking, certainly, but you also have to be born in the right era. Because think about it. Max Falkenstein held on to that job for 60 years. Bob Davis did it for 32 years. There's some guys that were just born in the wrong decade, and they have to wind up at a different school and that kind of thing. So I was supremely blessed that it worked out the way it did. But yeah, every move I ever made post-graduation at KU was strategically designed to put myself in position to have a chance at it.
So what you are telling me is that you tell college kids, don't try to be the next voice at KU, because I'm not going anywhere for like 40 years.
I'm trying to eat healthy. I'm getting 10,000 steps a day.
Trying
to live clean and be around for a while. But no, it's true. I mean, look at Denny Matthews and the Royals, right? And other guys come along. And by the way, Jake is tremendous with the Royals. Ryan Lefevre's fabulous. I love their entire crew. They're awesome. Steve Stewart as well. But yeah, certain guys hold certain chairs for a long time. And so you have to be pliable and willing to move and adjust. Hey, man, had Arizona State called and said you can be the next voice of the Sun Devils back in, I don't know, what would it have been, 2015? I probably would have taken it.
Yeah.
But ultimately this was the dream. My family is here. My friend group is largely here, and just so grateful that it worked out the way it did.
Absolutely. I did some play-by-play in Oklahoma at the high school level. Went to New York. I did it at Wagner College, which is FCS level. And I'm not going to lie, I think it's much harder than doing this. First off, I like giving my opinion. And you can't do that as much, obviously, doing what you do. And then also, I know where I want to take the show. I don't know how a play is unfolding, right? You've got to call a play and be creative on something that you don't know what's about to happen. And that's what I found to be very difficult. And then the other point, these jobs that you want may not open up for decades.
Correct.
So you just sit there. How many guys do you know in minor league baseball that are waiting for the call-up, but there's 30 jobs and these guys don't leave? It doesn't matter how good you are. You can't basically get yourself to one of these jobs no matter how good you are, and that's what I think is tough with play-by-play.
Totally is, particularly as the voice of a school. To me, you need to be good, obviously, and have decent pipes, but it's so much more about being the ambassador for the school.
Yes, you're right.
And how well do you connect with the fan base? How well do you do with engagement and outreach and that kind of thing? And so I encourage young broadcast professionals to work on that component of their repertoire, resume, or whatever, their skill set, because that, to me, in the end, when they hired me, they said, hey, man, you're going to do a great job calling the games, but that's only 40% of what we see this role as being. We knew you could be the ambassador amongst our fans and do things that makes us more philanthropically involved and more engaging with the next generation of Jayhawks. And so that's a big part of it, too.
It is. Brian Hanni is here on KCMO Talk Radio, of course, the voice of the Kansas Jayhawks. We're going to take a quick break, come back, and get you set for Arrowhead Stadium. Tomorrow they're taking on TCU, and that is part of a really fun season. You got the games at Children's Mercy, you got the games at Arrowhead, so we'll talk about that, everything going on with KU on the field, coming up next on 95.7 FM KCMO.
Call Mundo, 913-408-7957, now on 95.7 FM.
Brian Hanni, the voice of the Kansas Jayhawks, is here for our feature Friday on KCMO. They are getting set to play TCU tomorrow at Arrowhead Stadium. So they've, of course, got all the construction going on back in Lawrence. Arrowhead tomorrow. What's that going to be like for you, Brian, calling a game at Arrowhead Stadium?
I'm so fired up. I've been up there several times helping with some national network stuff, so I'm familiar with the angle.
Oh, you are?
And it does feel like you're on top of the moon, yeah. But, I mean, how cool is it? You think about college athletics and stadium rebuilds and what happens to a program when they get displaced for a year. Most schools are going to play at a junior college stadium or something like that. How cool is it for our student athletes, thanks to Travis Goff and his vision and leadership, that we get a chance to play at the home of the back-to-back defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs? I mean, our guys have been so excited about this all summer long. They had a chance to have a practice at GEHA Field. I guess it would have been mid-August during fall camp. And, I mean, they were all raving about it, taking selfies. Oh, my gosh, I get to play here, all that. So they won't be locker rooming in the same locker room as Patrick or anything like that. But walking down the same hallway and playing on the same field, that's pretty dang cool. And our players have just been so over the moon excited.
Now, how do you prep for that? Like, are they staying here in a hotel? Or are you guys coming in tomorrow morning? How does that work?
So we always, the football team that is, stays in Kansas City before Lawrence, Kansas home games.
Is that right?
They get them out of town the night before the game, so there's no distractions.
Oh.
And actually, I shouldn't give away specific hotels, but it's pretty close to where we're at right here, where they typically stay. And so it's technically a closer commute now of both the previous 2 games at Children's Mercy and now the final 4 games at Arrowhead than it would be to go all the way back into Lawrence. So their actual pre-game routine is simpler this year, believe it or not. Now, it may not be simple Monday through Friday because all these Kansas City games are played on grass fields. You might not know this, but the only grass practice field at Kansas is on the opposite side of campus. The actual football facility and football practice facility is all turf, AstroTurf. So what they've done in the weeks of our home games is they bust the guys to the other side of campus and they practice on grass because you want to practice like you play. So that's been a little bit of an adjustment. But otherwise, in some regards, this has actually been a shorter commute for our guys and not dissimilar at all from the typical Friday routine prior to a Saturday home game.
How about that? Learning something new here on KCMO with Brian Hanni, voice of the Jayhawks. So, I know some of the games are at Children's Mercy, some are at Arrowhead. How about the fans, getting the fans out tomorrow, getting them jam-packed and excited? The students, what's that process been like as you get ready for tomorrow?
That's the obvious hurdle, and that's something where you hope folks understand that this was a necessary means to an end.
Yeah.
In order to have a place as beautiful as the new reimagined David Booth, Kansas Memorial Stadium, the transformational Gateway District project, you're going to have a year without pregame tailgating on the hill. You're going to have a year without the downtown businesses getting that influx of fans coming in. And I get it. It's frustrating if you're a business owner locally, but understand this was so long overdue. Previous stadium was 102 years old. The new stadium, if you've seen the renderings or if you watched the live video cam at kugatewaydistrict.com, Pete, this thing is going to be the Taj Mahal of Big 12 football stadiums. This thing is absolutely beautiful. The light structures that are bent and twisted in a way to mirror the waving wheat fields of the state of Kansas, the way the stadium seating and the suites and the fan seating, whether it's the lower level or the upper deck, is pushed in closer to the field than ever before to make for better sight lines, better vantage points, closer access, all of that, more spacious seating. Everything was done and designed with a better fan experience in mind. And so I get it. For some fans that don't want to drive the extra distance to come to the games, hey, man, it's just 6 home games. It's just 1 year. But we're right back home next year. And then once Phase 2 is completed and they get the stands finished on the east side and they add in some of the entertainment district stuff, holy smokes, this is going to be such a neat entryway into campus. So bear with us for this 1 year. Experience it as something new. And yeah, it's a one-off. It's different, but it's exciting and new.
I was going to say, it's not like you have to go to a junior college, though. I mean, you're going to Arrowhead Stadium.
Exactly.
It's well worth the trip.
Exactly. And for a lot of fans, they might not have access to Chiefs tickets. Maybe they can't afford that price point or whatever. Here's a chance to see a game at Arrowhead. And I recognize the fact that we come in at 1-3 instead of 4-0, where a lot of folks forecast us to be. But I'll tell you what, in Lance we trust. There's no better coach for this program and no better leader for these young men. He's going to get them on track. It starts tomorrow at 2:30. I fully expect this team to be back in the winner's circle by about 6 p.m. And hopefully we're talking about an upwards ascent through October and November in a schedule that I think is very navigable for this team to still wind up in the thick of the Big 12 race, still wind up in their 3rd consecutive bowl game, which has never happened at Kansas. Yes, this first month hasn't gone the way we would have thought or hoped, but we're also just a handful of plays away from being 3-1 or 4-0.
Well, I was going to say, Illinois, UNLV, and West Virginia, ESPN does this cool thing where you can look at in-game odds to win a game. KU had at least an 80% chance to win each of those games at some point during the second half of that game, which there's 2 ways to look at that, of course, but you can look at that positively and say, hey, there are a couple of plays from 4-0, and you've only played one game in the Big 12. So really the entire season is still in front of you, and it starts tomorrow.
No doubt. All your goals are still out there,
Yes.
other than a perfect start, obviously. So I think that there's a lot to hang your hat on in terms of being optimistic and hopeful. It's not like you've been blown out in any of these games. It's not like you've had catastrophic injuries in these games. You've still got a senior-laden team with 30 seniors, most of which have been doing the heavy lifting on these previous 2 bowl seasons. But right now, as Coach Leipold would say, in crunch time, for whatever reason, we've struggled to make winning plays, closing the game type plays. He says we need to bring our best when our best is required. And they brought their best for the first 3 quarters in all 4 of these games. They've had some letdowns late. That's got to change tomorrow, and I personally think it will.
Now, when you look at the offense in particular, losing the OC, Andy Koltanecki, did I say that right?
Koltanecki, yeah.
Koltanecki to Penn State. Got overlooked by the casual fan probably. And then Jalen Daniels still kind of working his way back in after only playing a little bit last season. How is that offense coming together as Daniels gets more comfortable with the new OC as well in Jeff Grimes?
Great question. And Grimes, obviously, with a background of BYU and Baylor prior to coming to Kansas. And, yeah, you're going to have, an acclimation period, an adjustment period, certainly. And part of the offense's lack of production has had a lot to do with JD kind of shaking off the cobwebs after not playing in a game in 11 months.
Yeah.
And yet this is still a guy who is as dynamic of a game-breaking talent as we've ever had at Kansas. You think back to the bowl game versus Arkansas in the Liberty Bowl, more than 500 passing yards, set the school record, 5 passing TDs and a rushing TD. First guy to ever do that in a bowl game in FBS history. Amazing. He's capable of that, but we've also seen a guy that in Champaign and versus UNLV got bit by the turnover bug a little bit. And no doubt, your confidence, in those moments is questioned a bit, but this is a guy who's a great team leader. He absolutely leads by example each and every day. And I think he's got the self-confidence and swagger to get back to being the JD6 that we've all come to know and love. But when you haven't played in almost a year and you go through a little bit of adversity and one turnover turns into 2, you can understand how anybody would be pressing a little bit. And maybe some of that was going on in the 2-game stretch there prior to last week. I thought last week he made great strides, and he was under duress a lot and was able to expand the pocket and extend the play with his feet. And it didn't ultimately wind up in a win or a 300-yard passing day, but I think all of his coaches would tell you that was a step in the right direction. We love Jalen Daniels. We think Jalen Daniels is going to lead us to a bowl game this year. It's just been a little bit of an acclimation period, as I said, with a new play caller and with him shaking off the rust. But, hey, man, he's still got every pass catcher around him except for Mason Fairchild from the previous seasons. The continuity of what they brought back at the skill positions is off the charts. So, to me, it's only a matter of time before things really start clicking.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian Hanni is with us. In the last minute or so, Brian, I just want to tie this all back together. As a guy who went here, grew up here, now you've got your dream job, especially on the basketball side, where, of course, it's a historic program, but now you got exciting football as well. When you're looking around Allen Fieldhouse, you're getting ready for a game at Arrowhead. Do you pinch yourself? Is there something that you do to remind yourself of what you're doing and what you've got?
I do, actually. It's funny you asked about that, and you had no idea what you were walking down the path of. But I have a tradition before every men's basketball home game, and I would do it for football too, but the stadium's a little bigger. But before men's basketball home games, I take a walk around the concourse with my head down and my prayers lifted up, prayers of gratitude, and just so grateful to be where I'm at. Praying that the broadcast goes great and that I represent the school and the university in the best way I possibly can. And that centers me and gets me focused and ready to go before I crack the mic and hop on the air. But it also reminds me of just how fortunate I am to get to be here and be the steward of an athletic department and their storytelling in an era that I truly believe we'll look back on 30, 40 years from now and say, this was the golden era of Kansas athletics. Look at what Bill Self was doing with men's basketball. Look at what Lance Leipold built with Kansas football. Look at Ray Bouchard in volleyball, Dan Fitzgerald baseball, everything that was clicking at the right time under Travis Goff's leadership, who brought forth the greatest culture to work in and play in and coach in that we've ever had, and then assembled the greatest collection of coaching talent at the same time that we've ever had. So to be able to sit in this chair and tell their stories and introduce you to some of the great personalities of our student athletes, it's the greatest blessing of my lifetime. I'm so fired up to get the chance to do it, and I promise you, the best is still to come, maybe even in the next few months of this very year.
That's great. Brian Hanni, hey, man, thanks for being here, and enjoy the game tomorrow.
Thank you, Pete. Always good to see you, buddy.
Voice of the Jayhawks, Brian Hanni on KCMO Talk Radio.